listen. Don't forget to come back for me.
As long as you're not dead, Fred.
It's Frank. Frank West.
Zombies are no stranger to video games, especially not for Capcom. Besides the very popular Resident Evil franchise, Capcom has always had another great zombie series called Dead Rising. What was just a simple action RPG that did a good job showing off the power of the Xbox 360 has evolved into this long-running series spawning numerous sequels, ports, and even movies. Yet despite that, the fourth entry, which just released a year ago, received a little fanfare, and at the time of writing is the worst-selling entry in the entire series. What caused one of the most successful new IPs of the last generation to become a shadow of what it was in terms of sales and relevance? Personally, I've always loved the Dead Rising games, and after replaying the games over the course of the past year, I've been able to speculate on where Capcom Vancouver made their mistakes, so that they can hopefully get the series back on track. One thing that's been hurting the franchise is Capcom Vancouver's non-stop obsession with appealing to a wider audience, despite their previous success at doing so with Dead Rising 2 back in 2010. It was a perfect entry point for newcomers thanks to being multi-platform while also telling a standalone story. It also did a good job of satisfying fans by preserving what made the original such a fun and challenging game, while adding onto it with co-op and adding in tons of throwbacks to the original. Since then, however, CV began chasing after the Call of Duty audience, and although they would try to compromise by satisfying longtime fans and newcomers, they streamlined a few mechanics in Dead Rising 3, or as we saw in 4's original launch, ripped them out entirely. Now, while I have said that Dead Rising is a challenging series, that's mainly for dedicated players who want to get the game's true ending, or see all the content there is to the game. Players who just want to kill zombies are still free to do so. You could argue that doing so gets you the bad ending, but you still keep your progress for multiple playthroughs, or you can restart the story at any point while keeping your stats and knowing what comes next. Since these games are short and a lot of fun, this never really feels like a huge deal breaker. This highlights what I think was the best aspect of Dead Rising, the fact that it gave you the ability to play the game how you wanted to play it. It wasn't a GTA clone or a 60-hour long RPG, it was a quirky little sandbox game that had its own identity. Instead of creating this massive open world, Dead Rising just focused on content density and replay value. There are so many ways to play through the games, either by dicking around until the timer runs out, trying to complete the story mode, rescuing survivors and finding psychopaths. The game never limits you. There weren't any radio stations, but the game had the Soft-Kilter soundtrack mixing in elevator music with hard rock. Instead of the usual zombie apocalypse scenarios you see, Dead Rising takes place in colorful shopping areas with a great attention to detail. There wasn't, or still is, anything quite like Dead Rising's 1 and 2. Even Dead Rising 3, which underwent a massive tonal shift, still stands out among other games at the time. Compare that to Dead Rising 4, where it seems like just another video game. By now so many games have taken inspiration from Dead Rising, in terms of implementing RPG mechanics into non-RPG games, that the franchise no longer stands out. The incredible soundtrack are replaced by basic orchestral tracks that don't stand out. The challenge and freedom it gives the player is watered down, feeling nowhere near as well done as earlier games in the series. And worst of all, the timer and the multiple endings are completely gone from this game, with the true ending being sold as a $15 DLC. While the developers never admit to it, possibly due to being composed of new leads, I wonder if they began to think of Dead Rising as just another zombie game, losing sight of the franchise's identity just to appeal to a wider audience. It's really sad, as in some cases Dead Rising 4 does try to combat 3's criticisms in terms of its tone and setting, but it just drops the ball. Along with Dead Rising losing its identity, the series began to lose the ability to innovate. Dead Rising 1 probably wasn't the first action RPG hybrid of its kind, but it was unique and really pushed the Xbox 360 to its limits with the ability to have a ton of zombies on screen, while making it look good and keeping a consistent frame rate. Dead Rising 2 built on the formula of the first game, but added new things like a co-op mode, larger environments, more zombies on screen, even more weapons to choose from, a currency system, multiplayer, and introduced weapon combos before all games decided that they need weapon crafting. The spin-off, Off the Record, brought back the photography aspect from the first game, and also introduced a sandbox mode for players to mess around with, and exploring the map with no time limits to worry about. It also introduced challenges to complete throughout the map. Dead Rising 3 felt a bit less special in terms of mechanics. In some cases it just felt like a more refined version of Dead Rising 2, but the evolution made between the two games is still incredible. Weapon crafting can be done on the fly instead of needing to be done in workshops. Combo vehicles, which were experimented on in Dead Rising 2, have been expanded upon, and there are a lot more cars to find throughout the environment compared to how rare they were in prior games. Vehicles are also far more useful now more than ever, as the environment is the largest it's ever been in the series, and it's not just a bunch of areas separated by loading screens this time anymore. Now it's all seamless. Running on a new engine, the game looks incredible and still holds up for an Xbox One launch title. Players now get to choose where to level up their abilities, sprinting has been introduced, and the game has a ton of DLC which adds quite a bit in terms of story and side content. Not all of these changes work for the best though, as Dead Rising 3 is notably easier than its predecessors. Garages and safe houses store a ton of overpowered weapons and vehicles, making the game a cakewalk if you use these, and survivors no longer need to be brought back to safe houses. The game has its flaws and misses the charm of earlier games, but still laid out a solid foundation. Dead Rising 4 on the other hand didn't feel like the series was stagnating, but instead regressing. Co-op, a staple for 2 games now, has been removed, and the objective-based multiplayer just doesn't replace this. With the timer being removed, the day-to-night cycle is completely absent, and despite running on DR3's engine, the game just doesn't look as nice or feel like a technical improvement over prior games. In fact, the game is the buggiest it's ever been. They try to fix what wasn't broken with the control scheme, but it ends up feeling more limited than ever, as there's a pointless stuff button, and there's no longer a dedicated button to drop items or throw anything in your inventory. Psychopaths were replaced by maniacs. The game was lacking in content or worthwhile side missions. It lacked the attention to detail like zombies slipping on your vomit when you drank too much. It just feels like a conventional action game now. There were some things Dead Rising 4 did add, like button prompts to counter enemies grabbing you, a more traditional health system, and implementing a skill tree system. But it feels like cold comfort that Dead Rising, a series that ended up influencing the genre of games now seeks to copy what those same games have done as of late. Anything else that wasn't streamlined was already done in Dead Rising 3, which is a shame as Dead Rising 4 had a lot of potential to be a true return to form. There's also other reasons why I think the series just doesn't sell much anymore, and that's because it's largely an Xbox One exclusive, and just like the console, the games made for it now just don't feel relevant now like they did back then when everyone had to have an Xbox 360. DR4 was a timed exclusive, but the average consumer probably isn't even aware of the fact that the games are available on Steam or PlayStation 4 as there's been little advertising or build-up leading up to these ports. There's also been little advertising for the Dead Rising series in general as of late, compared to back then when 2 had a timed movie and spin-offs, or when Dead Rising 3 was part of the Xbox launch lineup. Despite all this, I don't think this series is going away anytime soon. Even with Part 4's poor sales, it still has performed far better than a whole bunch of flops in the AAA space, which wish they still had the fanbase Dead Rising still has. Even after DR4, I'll still be around to see what Capcom does with this series going forward. It's one of the few action RPG franchises that I could actually get into. It's just been on a downward slope due to multiple reasons, and I hope I've been able to explain why. Capcom Vancouver claims that the changes made for DR4 were so that there could be a parts 5, 6, and 7, and after seeing what they've done with Capcom Heroes, maybe they could finally bring the series back strong next time. Or maybe we'll finally see it become played out and put to rest. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching.